So welcome to more landscaping tools. In this video we're going to be showing you how to make flat shading optional inside your landscape material properties, importing and exporting landscape height maps, which are an image file that represent the landscape layout, reducing the resolution of the landscape. There's one very simple way of doing this in a few clicks if you want to go from high to low poly with some limitations. And importantly, using a texture in a landscape material rather than just having completely flat shading. So by the end of it, I'll have a finalized low poly landscape like this, which will actually have some material, still flat shading, but actually have a material that has some texture to it like this. And it will be an inescapable terrain where all the sides are too steep for the tank to leave. So that's important. Then we have our battle arena. So see you in there. So let's start with how to add a texture to our terrain. This technique will apply to high and low poly terrains. In fact, I'm going to leave the landscape material so that you can either make it flat shaded or not flat shaded very easily. So let's go find a texture first. One easy way to do that is to go to the Content tab, Add New, and then Add Feature or Content Pack. And this is a way of getting our starter content in after the event. So no point in starting with starter content if you don't need it, but if we want it now, we can just go to Content Packs, Starter Content, and add it to the project. Now, in that starter content under materials, notice a couple of things. We've got a couple of useful things in here. One is ground underscore grass. So that's the grass material. If we look at it, we'll see that under the usage section, it does have used with landscape ticked. So it is designed to be used as a landscape. And we'll find the same with the gravel, ground underscore gravel. So the question is, how do we use these actual textures rather than these flat colors? We want the flat shading still, potentially. We want to be able to choose flat shading on or off. Solid colors, like we might want a solid color for snow, but we're also going to want some textures. So let me show you that. What we do is we go ahead and find our material. So that's in content, and then let's work on the flatland one for now. And what we're going to do is replace these flat colors here with actual textures. So what you do is you do a search for texture, and you'll find texture sample. That's the one we want. Okay, so I'm going to get myself a couple of texture samples, just duplicate. And we're going to take the output of the texture samples into the layers. So that's the same as using flat colors. The only difference is they're going to want some UV maps, and that's going to tell these textures where on the landscape they're going to be. So we look for the landscape section. Then we're looking for landscape layer coordinates. That's what we want. And you plumb that into both of your texture samples for both the grass and the dirt. And then all you need to do is for the grass, you go and find the grass. So you go over to the Details tab under the Material Expression Texture, Base, and then Texture, use the drop-down, type grass, and choose that, and then the same for the gravel. Now you've got two on the gravel, you've got a normal map and a detail map. We're going to use just the detail for the moment, that's just the color, the albedo, the base color. The normal map would allow you to set some roughness. Now talking about roughness, we have this absolute world position here. We are not going to use that now, the flat shading, or we want the option to be able to use it. So in a moment we're going to kind of find a way of commenting this out in Blueprint. But for now, let's just check the effect of changing to texture samples instead of flat colors. So I'm just going to save this up. Minimize, and then when this recompiles, we'll see the effect. I quite like the effect of having flat shaded, low poly, but with a texture. The game The Witness, that fantastic puzzle game that came out in 2016, that has this type of effect. Low poly, but with textures on it. And now you can see the effect, okay? We have the same type, exactly the same painting as we had before, but now we can, with a sufficiently small brush, we can come in and paint dirt where we want it, grass where we want it, and get quite an interesting looking effect, I think. Fantastic. So that is how you use textures. You can use that on a high or a low poly landscape. The other thing I want to show you is how to make flat shading optional. So one very simple way of doing that is if you come in and hit C for comment, you can then put a comment block. It's better actually if you just, before you hit C for comment, if you select the blocks that you want to comment about, then hit C, and it'll put a comment block around this, and you can say wire to, oops, if I can type correctly, wire to normal for flat shading. Okay, wire to normal for flat shading, and then that gives you a group that you can move around. Then if we just break the link by right-clicking and then save, we've got some nodes here that are ready to use if we want to enable flat shading. So that's pretty cool. Let's just save that up and see what that looks like. And what's going to happen now is we won't have the flat shading anymore. So on a high poly landscape, this is what you would want. You'd want to turn off the flat shading like that and have smooth shading, and this will look absolutely fine. There you go. So this is ready to go for a high poly style. All right. You may get some repetition of your textures that looks a bit odd on a large landscape. Anisotropic filtering on your graphics card will help with that. But at the moment, we're just trying to make the first iteration of this landscape. All right. So I'm actually going to stick with low poly. So I'm going to delete my landscape material. I don't delete that. I'm going to leave flatland. I'm going to rewire it to normal like that. I want to stick with low poly because I want to get off landscapes now and I move on to the tank and moving and controlling the tank. The least fun thing about this game right now is not the landscapes, it's the fact it hasn't even got a tank in it, right? But I want to show you a couple of other landscape tools just before we leave this. So the first thing I want to show you is the concept of exporting your own height map. So you come to Landscape tab, to Sculpt, and then down to the target layers, you right click, it's a bit hidden, on the height map, and you can say export to file. So I'm just going to do that quickly. I'm just going to call it test. Now if I go look at this test, let's go look at the PNG, you can see it's a small PNG, this one, because my landscape's relatively low res. You can see the tiny bit of landscape I've built up on the right-hand side here, just a slightly lighter colouring. All right, so that's what a height map is. It's a top-down view. Now, luckily, one of our students, Chris, has provided us with a much more detailed height map. You're welcome to import that. There it is. So that is a height map that has got a lot more detail, and it was created by something called TerraGen. Let me just show you how you would import that if you wanted to. What you could do is you could add a... Well, actually, one of the easiest things to do here is just to create yourself a new scene altogether. So just make a new level, a new empty level, saving what we've got, and then work on another level if you want to experiment with high versus low if you're not decided yet. So in this new level, we can then come to Landscapes, Manage, Import from File, go grab the file that's attached to this very lecture. There it is. Now notice this is a 5 by 5 kilometer landscape, but we're just going to go with that for the moment, just so I can demonstrate what this would look like. Now, what we need is a landscape material here. So let's go and find the world outliner, find the landscape, go assign a material to it, which I'm going to use flatland here. Now, the other problem, if you look, is why is this rendering so poorly in this new scene? Well, if you go compare it to the other scene that we've got, which is the battleground, so we better save this scene as battleground high. Let's just go look at the other scene and see what's missing, right? So if you look in this scene in the world outliner, we've got atmospheric fog, a directional light, a light source, a light mass importance volume, a player start, a sky sphere. We've got all this stuff that we don't have over here in this new battleground high because it was empty when we created it. So one thing you can do is just paste all that in. I just copied those from the other scene or level and pasted them in here. Now you can see the beauty of what TerraGen has created us. This landscape really does look like it's been crafted with water, basically, or something like that. It looks very natural. The problem with this landscape as it stands is that you could easily drive a tank, say, up this valley here, over the top, and then down the back, and you could end up discovering the end of the world, and we don't want to be discovering the end of the world. So I just wanted to show you how you can do this type of import. I'm actually not going to use this landscape right now. It's setting the bar too high. It's too beautiful. I'd have to do too much work with materials and textures, and this could turn into a whole course on landscaping, which it isn't. So I'm going to pop back to my battleground, my low poly battleground here, having showed you that. Oh, hang on, one more thing. There is one other thing I want to show you, which is you may want to convert a high poly landscape to a low poly landscape. Let me show you a really quick way of doing that. You can go into the landscaping tool of modes. You can go into manage and then down to change component size. And you can go from 255 quads, say, down to 15 and select resample. So you would reduce your selection size and then resample. If you apply that, let's just see what this looks like. There you go. So now we've got a TerraGen generated low poly style landscape, which is quite interesting. But the resampling can lead to some really inconsistent polygon sizes. So it is a possibility for you as changing size, but it's not really recommended. I would rather you just build low poly landscapes from scratch because you can get some really weird artifacts that you're seeing here. But you may be interested in that, so wanted to put it in for you. Let's go back to my low poly landscape here. I'm going to stick with this style for now, and I'm just going to really quickly make it what I'm looking for, which is just a really simple mountainous area around the outside that prevents us from leaving. So I'm just going to go ahead and sculpt with a large brush and a strong large brush, and then just get it all sculpted up. And it's surprising how well just going around and roughly just drawing around the edges of the landscape can actually work. And if you do this, if you do low poly landscapes like this, then you get to see your geometry and you get a more consistent set of polygon sizes. Okay, now Unreal is really good with high poly stuff, and you can make beautiful, interesting looking high poly landscapes, and we'll cover some more of things like post-processing effects and the like later. But to keep my time down and the amount of time you need to watch me just sculpting landscapes, I'm going to stick with this low poly stuff. But all of the techniques I've just showed you apply to high poly as well. So a little hint for you, if you're having trouble seeing things in shadows, is you can switch from lit to unlit mode, and that will allow you to really quickly just see the landscape without worrying about where the shadows are. And then you can paint your gravel on the shaded or sloped sides of the mountains really quite easily. It only really matters what it looks like from the middle of the arena, because that's the only place that the tanks are going to be judging it from. It's quite usual for things that you can't see to not be looking right. That just saves time in the production. So I'm just going to quickly pop these gravel kind of colours down here on the sides, making sure that it's good enough for now, bearing in mind we can change everything and iterate, and want to be changing everything and iterating regularly. And then we are done. We have an arena. You've seen high poly, you've seen low poly, you've seen flat shaded, you've seen smooth shaded, you've seen using materials that use either textures or just flat colors, and basically you have everything you need to create simple landscapes, or even go and get yourself a trial of TerraGen or the like and make something really, really fantastic looking. So if I go back to lit now, then we have a pretty cool looking low poly layout. It's fine for me. It's a great arena, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll start actually making the tanks work.